Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the messy middle of being out on your own and starting over with the people who've done it. I'm your host, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into today's story of starting over. Hello. Here we are for my favorite thing in the whole world, exploring the stories of fascinating people who throw themselves into new career pathways, creative endeavors, and businesses, getting beyond the shiny victories and into the middle bits, which are pretty well the only bits, the never-ending messiness of muddling through on the stuff that matters to us. I reckon it's a safe bet to say that most of us have a pretty sizable fascination and investment of time in understanding what makes us tick and how to get the best out of ourselves. If your reading list is anything like mine, every time you think you've found the book and the theory, you're straight onto another one. It's endlessly enjoyable and such important work. Now, I bring this up for two reasons. The first one is I've been a little recluse lately on the socials and generally in regular life because I've been locked in my own head on a creative journey, coming up with a second weekly episode for you. Now, I've got a way to go on actually bringing this to life and finding the time to make it happen, but it'll be dedicated to the science of starting over, the theories and practices from specialists in their field that can support us along the way. What do you think? Of course, you can't actually answer me here on this platform. It would be super handy if you could. But if it sounds like something you think you'd be into, drop me a DM on Insta at Unemployed and Afraid, or email me, kim@goodsideofthebed.com, and let me know your thoughts and wish me Godspeed on making it happen. And the second reason for bringing this up is my guest today happens to have some pretty deep knowledge of human behavior, and he brings it together with the magic of creativity. It's Adam Ferrier, whose work I've been following since around 2015, which I'm aware makes me sound mildly stalkerish. If this is your first introduction to Adam's work and way of thinking, you're welcome. Buy the books and follow the creativity of his ad agency, Thinkerbell. And if you already know his work, you know you're going to love this chat. We talk about the importance of finding the aligned people that will strap into the journey with you, why it doesn't matter if you fuck things up, and why it's important to be less hard on ourselves. This chat is a good one. Listener, you and I have the absolute privilege of exploring the story of one very interesting human today. I'm here with Adam Ferrier, consumer psychologist and founder of the highly awarded agency Thinkerbell. And for context to the highly awarded part, Thinkerbell was awarded Ad News Creative Agency of the Year after just 2 years in business. He's a keynote speaker, a regular panellist on Gruen, the project, and has apparently appeared on Australia's Next Top Model, which I'm very curious about. He is co-host of my new favourite podcast, apart from this one, naturally, Black T-Shirts. He's created 2 conferences and sits on 3 boards, including social influence platform Tribe. He's a board game creator and 2-by author for the ever-relevant books titled The Advertising Effect, How to Change Behaviour, and Stop Listening to the Customer. And with so much creative ideation and launch experience, I am absolutely stoked to pick your brain today, Adam. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thank you. This will be fun.
Adam, before we kick into your career and your creation story, I'd love to know, how would your wife describe you?
Gosh, that's nice. That's a good question, and I love it. I think she'll describe me as loving and a bit like a bull in a china shop, like a lovable bull in a china shop, destroying things, not meaning to, apologizing, fucking up, but with good intentions.
Fantastic. That's an excellent introduction. Okay, take me back a little way. So before the bio that I just read out about you, who were you before you were the person that we're meeting today?
My mum used to always say I was blessed with no ambition, and I always had very, very minimal expectations on myself. I can remember after graduating with degrees in commerce, and my mates had degrees in economics, none of us could get a job, and we're all crushing cardboard boxes in a summertime job in these big bins. And my mate yelled over to me, those bloody econs and commerce degrees. And I just remember that thinking, oh, fuck, what am I going to do with my life? And so I think before I've got to where I've got to, I reckon there was a pretty lost individual who had no belief that anybody could pay me to do a job full time. And so I am forever just thankful that I'm gainfully employed and I've got somewhere to turn up to. And so I really love it that I had low expectations of my career, because I'm now just very happy with what I've achieved based off low expectations.
The box moment. Yeah, I feel like we've all had one of those where you just be like, oh, wow, what's happened? What am I doing here?
What the fuck am I doing with my life? Yeah.
In my research of you, when you went into psychology, I saw a little bit about your thesis, identifying the underlying constructs of cool people. This sounds absolutely fascinating. What drew you to this topic and what did you find out?
So when I was at school, I was interested in money and people, and I was failing school, and a tutor said to me I should become a consumer psychologist. And I thought, fuck, that sounds perfect. Got a degree in commerce, then transferred over to psychology during that time. But I got my first job in the prison system as a psychologist. And then I did my thesis, and I wanted to do my thesis in a way that could guarantee me a transition from working in a forensic setting to working in a consumer setting. So I thought, what does everyone want to know about? And they all want to know at the time about cool and what makes brands cool. And so I thought if I did my thesis on that, it'll be a gateway into that career. And it was, it really worked really well. Like the media lapped it up and I got to dine out on it, and I became a cool hunter for a while. And so I reckon it was quite strategic of me to choose something so commercial. And I got to find out, what makes people cool, which is also a side benefit.
That's a really good side benefit. Have you always been quite strategic like that, being able to think ahead? What I do now speaks to this later?
Never. I reckon that's the only time in my life I've ever done anything quite like that. Not at all. Zero strategic ability whatsoever. Don't let my clients hear me say that.
It's very comforting to hear that, if I'm honest, because I often think, if I could just get a little bit further ahead and think about what could matter for here, I could, do the work right now. But would you say you're more instinct-based in that?
I'd say I'm just more, I like, at Thinkerbell, we have people who will ask me, what's the long-term strategy? And I'm just pretty open about, I don't think there really is one. It's just doing what you do well and opportunities will come. And I think the same thing applies for work or for yourself. I'm going to contradict myself slightly and say, somebody once said to me, in that time, I've been unemployed a couple of times in my life, but in that time, at the same time, the box crushing, I had no idea what my next step was. And somebody just said, if you don't have a goal, make one up. And I quite liked that advice and it stayed with me. And so I just thought, fuck, that whole consumer psychology thing that tutor told me about at school, I quite like that. That did ring true to me. So I am going to make that my goal and I'm going to try to get there. So I got there by just making up a goal, and that's how it happened. But more, it's just a rolling mass of do what you do well, say yes to things, and opportunity comes from that.
It's interesting that you bring that back up and work back to that, because it's a message I think has threaded through some of the most recent episodes of this podcast, just even in my own life and the life of some others I work with that are on this journey. Just that jump and the net will appear. I'm terrible with analogies, so I always get them wrong, but just going forth and doing something based on what feels right to you and allowing those opportunities to come. It's a very interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. And, if you take it back to when you're trying to be creative and you put a blank piece of paper in front of somebody, if it's blank, it'll get filled in. You'll have an idea and you'll put it down. If you're in a conversation and you're silent, the other person will jump in and fill the space. It will happen. And it's a little bit like that, I think, in those moments in life, isn't it? If you're comfortable enough to just walk into and be happy and just be content in the stillness, then I think the opportunities, I don't know, they somehow find a way of presenting themselves. That's not to say it's not harrowing at the time, but yeah.
It's that trust thing I keep coming back. It's a word that I haunt myself with every day. Just trust and go for it.
But with that, I'm pretty interested in trust versus privilege. And like if I do any kind of assessment on my privilege, I tick just about every single box, all right? And so it's easy for me, and maybe it's easy for you to put trust into the world and talk about the white space and it'll come. But fuck, if you don't tick all of those privilege boxes, I wonder how privileged this conversation also becomes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's having an awareness of that. You've planted a seed of thought there for me. I'm going to dine out on that one for a while. Tell me, you went from psychology, you just said a prison, maximum security prison, I believe, to strategy at an ad agency. So I'm sensing where the shift kind of came from, but I was just really interested to learn, what was your first day at the agency like and how did it grow?
It went prisons, then brand consultancy. And while I was doing brand consultancy, I used to do the prison work on the weekend.
Wow.
So I used to assess prisoners for court.
Mm-hmm.
And I just loved it. So I kind of did it. And that's when I was in the consultancy, that's when I was doing cool hunting. So I was doing cool hunting and assessing inmates for going into the prisons and assessing them for court. And then I kept that up for a long time. And then when I was at Psychology, I was still doing it on the weekend. So I was able to mix quite a superficial, vainglorious ad agency shit with going into prisons and stuff. And that was interesting. It was cool. What was fascinating was how little psychology there was at the time in advertising. It really felt like it was a lot of just made up bullshit and the executive creative director saying, trust me. And it's amazing how much advertising has embraced marketing sciences, but that's a different story. But it was really interesting working in the prison system and then seeing my mates in corporate life having lunch at Rockpool, which was the place at the time, and all that kind of shit. And that's the pressure that put on me, thinking, fuck, am I really happy working in a prison as a psychologist when my mates are having so much more of a hedonistic lifestyle? And that was an interesting thing to reconcile.
That's really interesting, thinking back to your point on privilege and I guess awareness of where privilege isn't existing right now, or how much that might have played into the decisions that you made, being able to have that perspective from being on a parallel side to what your friends were doing.
Yeah, I reckon what's really interesting now is I think the helping professions and healthcare and what COVID's done is kind of made people aware of the fundamentals and the basics of life a little bit. And I see those kind of careers getting their moment in the sun and people saluting and being more cognizant of everyday heroes, slightly patronizing language and all that kind of stuff. And it's nice to see those types of careers getting more accolades and more attention. And it's kind of also good to see advertising getting berated all the time, you know, in the same light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's endlessly enjoyable. And I do note and enjoy your opinions in that space. I often enjoy the comment section on your LinkedIn posts about opinions on advertising, but I enjoy that you share them. How do you manage that conversation, that challenge of opinion?
Well, in all honesty, I reckon, you know, I post to rationalize to feel better about myself. 65% of our GDP is made up of consumer-driven demand. The higher the GDP, the more access to healthcare there is, the more access to education, the safer the community generally is. So advertising as a whole, stimulating demand to increase the GDP is a good thing for everybody. So at the fundamentals of the industry, it's doing really good things for society. Around the edges, there's obviously significant issues to address, but I go into it with a pretty clear conscience that I reckon ultimately is part of the solution. And advertising is only evil when it advertises as evil things. And I guess I kind of believe that.
I like that. The first agency you co-founded was Naked Communications. Why did you decide to create it? And two-part question, how did it feel when it ended?
So Naked, I co-founded the APAC arm of it. So it was originally 4 years before we started it. It really started in the UK. And so we started it in APAC and it felt fantastic. So I'd had a year and a half in advertising. All of us were young and everyone, we kind of got a bit derided for being really antagonistic and we hadn't really earned our stripes in the industry yet. And so it felt very cavalier and it felt really good fun. It felt like we were fucking with the industry. And then we created this culture of kind of recklessness and, you know, Brilliant Misfits was our kind of little thing, our recruitment thing. So it felt really good. And then we sold it to a company called Photon, who were like us, but at a corporate level. And they were kind of cowboys and as dysfunctional as we were, but at a corporate level. And that felt good for a while. But then that holding company got bought by another company who we were culturally completely not aligned with. And then the whole thing dismantled and it felt very sad. It was awful. But there's a very strong group of people who we're very close friends with, you know, who just all shared that really nice experience of building a strong brand and a really strong culture. And then it was a really kind of big moment in my life, and I've got good friends from it. So it was all up wonderful.
I love that you talk about messing with the industry and fucking up people's MOs. And I often like to think that I have that ability in me, but I'm scared shitless to do it. How do you get over the fear of doing things differently and the opinions of others while you're doing it? Or is that a fear that isn't existing for you?
A few things come to mind. I remember we had one at Naked, we had a all partners meeting once, and I asked, as a warm-up exercise, I asked everyone to describe themselves at school, and all the partners one by one said, oh yeah, I got picked on a lot, I was an outsider, I didn't really fit in, I got into a lot of trouble. And I was like, oh fuck, no wonder this company is such a basket case, because we keep on recruiting other basket cases to become business partners. So number one, find friends who want to fuck with things would be my first answer to your question. The second answer to your question is, I do remember fucking up in majorly, not fucking with the world, but literally fucking up in a quite a significant way at one stage. And my business partner just said to me, never react or worry about the short term. The short term never really matters, because Daniel Kahneman, a behavioral economist of some note, says nothing's as big as you think it is, especially when you're thinking about it. And it's really true, right? So if you can just have faith that if you fuck up or you try to do something cavalier and you get derided or you make a fool of yourself, tomorrow nobody's going to give a fuck. And coupled with that, even at the time, it's not as big to anybody else as it is to you. People just do not care. And they don't care about anything you say. And I do a lot of public speaking, and I reckon I could get up and just fucking mumble shit. And I often do mumble shit. And people don't really, they take out what they want to take out. And what you actually, say doesn't matter sometimes as much. So I just think, don't take, I don't know. So I think it's really hard to get people to care. It's really hard to fuck up to a degree where other people are going to care enough. So if you can amplify or exaggerate, then at the very least, you're just going to get a reaction. And that's possibly better than not getting a reaction, depending on what type of person you are. So people don't care, don't react to the short term, and find like-minded souls.
It's great advice. Your agency, Thinkerbell, practices measured magic, which I just love. Love it the way it sounds. But to be the space where marketing science meets hardcore creativity, and this idea, where did it start to seed from? And what was it like entering Adland and the arena with this model?
So measured magic is a really lovely summing up, and the alliteration of it and the ease of the cognitive fluency it creates is part of its charm and part of its cleverness. And it's a really good foundation for the brand. And then we have thinkers and tinkers. We start each week with Measured Monday. We end each week with Magic Hour. And the whole business is branded in a really coherent way with good distinctive assets and cool logo and all that. And I reckon that's really important, because I don't think many brands in our industry brand themselves really well. And I also, when I'm talking about this shit, I also try to bring that back to an individual level as well. I have my distinctive brand assets, kind of fat, long black, shaggy hair, glasses, disheveled appearance, blah, blah, blah. And I just keep it that way because everyone kind of knows what to expect. And so I think that branding thing is really important. The way we got to it is my background's clinical psychology, marketing sciences, behavior change. So marketing sciencey kind of person. 2 creators in my previous agency. So marketing sciences meets hardcore creativity was the proposition with the people who set up, and also the structure of the business. And then when we started the agency, we kind of just to that point, just to that bit about trust and that white space before we're talking about, we kind of felt very confident that if we start it, they'll come. And so it felt really good just going in. What I loved was going into the market with a fully branded proposition, knowing what we looked like, what we were going to be about, having a nicely created brand built off an insight and all this kind of stuff, and then just dropping it into that industry. And then it kind of worked, and we were confident it would work. And And it has. And it was interesting because we were older than I reckon most startups were. And so the opportunity cost was high because we all had kind of established careers, but it didn't feel particularly scary because the central idea felt pretty strong.
I think there's a lot of benefit there when considering the brand and all the touch points. I didn't want to smooth over that because I think it's just a really interesting point to reiterate or just take away that, considering those brand touch points at all levels down to the titles, the job titles is so interesting.
Just on that point, I think in the creator economy and with side hustles and stuff, just really considering the branding of all of that and how they ladder back to you as an individual. And your relationship with that brand and just trying to get all that kind of stuff right, I think is really important.
That work I find incredibly fascinating, and I can see the value and the importance of it. I mean, I guess coming into Thinkerbell, you had partners, you had people, you had brains to really work things through. But I mean, how do you even approach that branding work and that view to look up and be like, how does this ladder up to me? And how does this play out in the brand? What sort of tactics do you employ to get started?
It's a hard question to answer, isn't it? Because everyone's different. And so it just depends on who you are. But I think maybe it's about asking yourself the right questions and knowing what you're trying to aim for. And so I think there's only two kind of main things to get right. What's the meaning of the brand you're going for? So what is that central idea about yourself? At my agency, we play this ridiculous game where we get everyone to come up with their own brand positioning as an individual. And we do that by reconciling two opposites. So get two opposite things and bring them together to create a unified meaning. And so my brand positioning is enigmatic irritation. So irritating, but kind of interesting. So, and I quite like that. So I can work with that. And then, so get your meaning right, what it is you stand for. And then, this is going to sound a bit shit, but get your distinctive brand assets right. How do people recognize you visually, sensorially, and keep those as consistent as possible? And that's a good enough start point, right? So again, taking the agency Thinkerbell, Thinkerbell is measured magic, which is shorthand for marketing science and hardcore creativity. And then we've got a pink and green. We've got our little logo, Rodin's, I think, with Tinkerbell's wings, and you know what I mean? So just get the meaning right, and then get all the visuals right, and then you're halfway there.
I mean, as soon as we hang up from this podcast, I'm absolutely doing that exercise to get my brand position up for myself, because that sounds like a lot of fun.
I could do it for you right now if you like.
Oh, I'd love that.
That's great. That's a good attitude. No, but I was joking, but I like it. Right, fuck, let's do it. Let's do it.
That's basically my brand position right there, which is, something fun. Yes, let's do that. I mean, bringing us back to, I guess, the sense of starting over. This is a question that I would love you to talk to me a little bit about from a psychology sense, the common psychological challenges that come up when you're trying something new or learning something new as an adult.
So what can I say to that? I think maybe when you're trying something new, it's an interesting question. Maybe it's trying to create a narrative. Maybe the most interesting thing is trying to create a narrative in your head between where you've been and where you want to go, and what the advantage is to that. So all I can do is draw my own experience, but working in the prison system and then going into the cool hunting or brand consultancy, all I could say was, if I can understand the extremes of human behavior, then I can understand all human behavior. And that's really useful in a marketing context. When I used to work in the prison system for Corrective Services New South Wales, really kind of shitty working environment, as you can imagine. And a few people jumped into corporate world, and they would always say, look, if I can create and affect change and be an effective person within the environment of a prison system, then I can certainly do that within your comfortable corporate world. The other thing is what employers want, something interesting to say about their employees. And so I can always remember my employer saying, this is Adam, he used to work in the prison system. It was almost the first thing they'd say about me, because it somehow made me interesting or legitimized what I was doing in some kind of way. And so whatever experience you have, if it's tangential to where you're going, is make sure you frame that as a positive to where you're trying to enter to, and find the connecting narrative. Don't dismiss it no matter what it is, because if it's a tangential leap, then it's going to be unusual, and there's going to be value just purely in that unusualness, because you've got, it's going to be a diverse opinion, or you're going to be coming at problems slightly differently for whatever reason, whatever it is that you bring. So, but it's up to you to find that narrative and spin that into a strength.
Yeah, I love that. And do you think that's difficult to do in the moment? Or do you think
I think it's impossible. I think it's impossible to do it in the moment. I think it'd be really fucking hard. Yeah, I reckon it'd be really hard. I do remember once when I tried to apply for Camp America when I was at uni, and I remember them once saying, "What are your weaknesses?" And I thought about it for a while, and I'd never heard that question before. And I thought, and I said, I don't really think I've got any. And possibly the worst answer, right, to that question. But I couldn't think of anything to say at the time. I didn't get to go to Cap America because I had no emotional IQ or no emotional EQ at all. So anyway, so I do think, again, it's an interesting question you said before about, am I strategic on those things? I said, no, not at all. Some of your questions are obviously showing that I maybe am a little bit strategic in how I approach these things, and maybe a bit more than I'd like to be. But I do think you need to reflect on that stuff as you're trying to get into, or trying to transition from wherever you are to wherever you want to go to.
That's really interesting. A retrospective look at yourself is so helpful. I just sometimes wish I could skirt ahead and go, oh yeah, got the narrative now. Okay, I'll go back and I'll apply that to all of the things I'm doing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I guess that is my current fascination at the moment, that sort of disparate nature of when you're trying to level up or do something new and you just don't know how to get there, and that paralysis. I guess I'll take this podcast for example. I've got ideas about where I want to take it and where I want to go, and I can see those over there, but I might not necessarily know exactly all the steps that are in place to get to that thing. And naturally I can go and I can find those and I can ask people, but it's the mental side of things. So the fact that my brain might be working on an operational system of, I know what I've seen and I want to bring those things together into what's coming next. And so I find that little curly bit in the middle where my brain's like, I haven't seen what steps you need to take right now, so I don't know how to help you. And pushing past that to just try things anyway. I don't know if I'm articulating that as effective as I'd like to, because it's just a challenge that I'm constantly thinking about, the way that our brains work against us when we're trying to do something new in a path that we haven't seen someone else do before.
Yeah, and it's a little bit Brené Brown, but I love, we talk about Batman marketing, which is about embracing your weaknesses and dialing up your weakness. And in the world of marketing, everyone's talking about their strengths, and your strengths are likely to be generic. So in the world of beer, all beers have a crisp clean taste, but tell me something more interesting about that. Or all cars marry style and performance, but what is it that's not like everyone else? And often it's a weakness. And expressing weakness or vulnerability obviously allows people to lean in and be more interested and so forth. But if you're trying to get a job in advertising, you've spent your whole life working in a prison system and you're starting at ground zero and you're older than most, it's up to you to look at all of that and embrace it as part of a narrative and talk about it. And it's probably going to be, as I said before, it's going to be your defining feature. So with you and your podcast example, what I found interesting and what I find interesting about this whole thing, and the reason why I said yes quite readily to joining you on this, is there's so much shit about achievement and winning and Tim Ferriss and ice baths and Wim Hof and all this crap. There's very little out there saying, your life is messy, always in a period of transition. Don't ever kid yourself. You're always someplace trying to get someplace else. That messy bit is it. That's all there is. And so, yeah, I quite like the idea of being cognizant of that and then just turning it, just leaning into that and finding the story or the truth in that somehow.
Firstly, thank you. That's very kind feedback. I'm glad that the messiness is coming through in the narrative, because it's absolutely the feel.
You're nailing the messiness.
I don't know if I want that on my tombstone or not, but I'll take it. You've launched and ended and launched and ended a number of times within your career already. That shows a lot of resilience, and I imagine it takes a lot of resilience to find that energy to go into the new thing again. What is it that, or is there anything, I should say, that keeps you creatively charged in that space, or just keeps lifting you up to go into the next thing?
Yeah, I reckon I'm lucky that I've got a disposition that's pretty interested in things, and I just have a natural tendency to say yes to things, which leads to opportunity. And then I think that then you go, oh shit, that's interesting. That led to that, that led to that. And you keep on saying yes to things and you keep on exploring different things. So it keeps on leading to things. So I don't struggle necessarily with energy. I struggle maybe with sometimes being too interested and wanting to come and keep on getting the dopamine hits of new challenge after new challenge and all that kind of shit. So I think my challenge is just trying to be a bit happier, being a bit more still and not having to, be excited all the time. Like it's okay to just stop and do nothing.
Does that translate sometimes for you to be, when you're really excited about something, to kind of feel like you never go deep enough on a topic? I mean, I feel like it's a loaded question given that you are a psychologist. You're naturally going to go deep in places. But yeah, I'm curious, do you feel like the excitement and the pull into the new things takes away from being heavily deep and engaged in the one thing that you're already working on?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of conversation at the moment around deep work and deep focus and so forth. Yeah. And I can remember I read a book once by Edward de Bono called How to Be More Interesting. And I thought, that'll be a useful book to read. And the answer to his book was having deep interests. So if you can go deep on something, then you've got something to offer nearly everything because you can draw on that. So I draw on my forensic psychology experience, but within that is psychology, within that's behavioral economics and marketing, and it all kind of ladders down to kind of being somebody who understands human behavior a bit. I mean, it depends on who you ask on whether I understand it or not, but I quite like the superficial. There's a song in the 90s, there was a guy singing, he said, my girlfriend's got really deep thoughts. What's so special about really deep thoughts? And I just remember that line thinking, fuck yeah, going deep isn't necessarily better than skimming across the top. Yeah, so I'm being a bit vague. In fact, I really hope you just edit this whole bit out. But I don't necessarily know what, I think it's important, but so having a really deep knowledge base on something is really invaluable because you wire the brain to understand that whole kind of thing, and then you can keep on drawing upon that pool of knowledge all the time. And so you working at Nova for those years, you'll understand the radio industry, and no matter where you go for the rest of your life, you'll be drawing upon that knowledge, whether you like it or not. So you've got deep knowledge there. And so in the same kind of thing as the forensic psychology thing, it's always kind of there. But I would like to say that, I don't mind having a kind of a light touch approach to life across lots of different industries and cross-fertilizing ideas as well. I think it's kind of cool.
Do you have any parallel interests on the boil at the moment? Anything that's not, above the line career? Just anything that you're interested in?
Yeah. So I was just describing my life. I thought I've got a really thick rope of interest made up of many strings in career. So we've got the author stuff, we've got the podcast, we've got the agency and all that kind of stuff. And they're all kind of different strings, but they're all interrelated at that level. And I think at the moment I need to take on something that's quite different. So last year I joined the St Kilda Historical Society, but that didn't work out. So if anybody's got a tangential interest for me that's not related to my career, I wanted to say, get into this. I think it's time to take one on.
Yeah. Well, if you're interested in ceramics, I'm happy to teach you a few things. I've just learned that the last couple of years. But yeah, parallel interests are fascinating. But I often end up making the things that I'm interested in inadvertently into my career anyway, even if I start trying to make it a hobby.
No, that's what I do. And then you suck it in. And then it's not I don't know if it's a great thing to do because it tends, for me anyway, I kind of sometimes tend to kill I
think we're all individualistic in that we want to succeed and be financially successful. So I think it's kind of natural, isn't it? This thing's really cool. I'm interested in it. How can I make money from it? That's kind of the end goal for everything.
Yeah, maybe. Or because if I take that analogy of the rope's so thick that it kind of draws everything else into it, but I don't want it to. I'd like to have those other things. And I guess I've got my family and my kids. It's very hard. Actually, even with the kids, my 10-year-old is now so into popular culture, and I'm going, oh my gosh, it's great. Now I just get to I'm seeing all the culture stuff. I'm thinking, fuck, don't bloody commercialize your.
Brilliant. Do you find it difficult to manage all of the strings in the rope, all the different things that you're focusing on to actually lock your focus into any one thing at a time?
No, not necessarily, because it's not necessarily my objective. I'm pretty good at switching gears and going from one thing to the next quite readily. And in terms of a knowledge base, it's all kind of tends to build on itself. So it all seems to be helping each other. And I do feel like I'm quite good at just switching gears quite quickly, depending on what I'm doing. The other challenges are more about the stillness and stuff.
Yeah, I've heard you describe yourself as creating a whirlwind wherever you go, just messing everything up.
Yes, kind of. Yes, a little bit.
One thing I wanted to just chat with you, and I mentioned it before when I talked about the comments section on your LinkedIn posts and how enjoyable they can be sometimes, but just, putting yourself out there and trying something completely new and facing the judgment of others in that space, and whether or not you have identified your own brand or your own intent for what you're doing, the opinions of others and those coming into your awareness. You seem to manage that very well from the outset, but I'm interested in your own experience. How do you manage that? And does it frustrate you? Do you invite it?
Both. It does frustrate me and I invite it, and it frustrates me. But I think if you have a good sense of self and you know what you stand for and what you're capable of and what you're not capable of, and then if you can have a really healthy respect for your limitations and for the fact that you're just trying to do the best you can and that's all you can do, then everything else, it gets easier to bat criticisms away or conflicting opinion away, because all you can do is the best you can do with the resources you have at that time in your life. And I'm pretty easy on myself. You can either be hard on yourself or easy on yourself. Again, I think that might be a disposition thing, but I think I'm pretty easy on myself. Maybe it's that low expectations thing. So being pretty easy on myself, doing the best I can do at the time with the resources I have, and having a pretty good understanding of who I am and what I want in the world, they are quite good at helping me deal with criticisms, insults, and so on. And, I do get a lot of criticism for being narcissistic or drawing attention to myself or over-profiling our work or over-profiling the agency or doing those kind of things. And so some of that hurts because there's a truth in it. I think, oh, fuck, do I really need that a bit of attention? Do I really need to do that? But then I kind of rest back on all those other things. Yeah, maybe. So what? That's, am I really hurting anyone? It was fun. It was a good thing to do. I'm proud of it, et cetera, et cetera. So I can rationalize that stuff away pretty well.
What would you say to somebody, I guess putting your psychologist hat on for a moment, what would you say to somebody that is quite hard on themselves?
It's a big question. I don't think there's any one thing I could say to that person. I'd probably start to ask them why and try to get them to identify why and have a conversation around the benefits of that and if it's working for them and if they want to change and be less hard on themselves. But as my business partner once said to me with psychology is, I know enough to unpack people, but I don't know enough to put them back together again. So I would steer clear of trying to help them in any particular way. But I see a lot of it, right? I see a lot of it coming back to that sense of expectation now. And because the economy is so unevenly distributed now, extreme wealth and extreme success is really close neighbors to extreme poverty and depression and so forth. And so then that creates a massive expectation gap for everybody, for where they are to where they think they should be, because you can compare yourself to the more successful people so readily. And so being easy on yourself and being proud of your achievements, no matter how, small they are, is really, really important, or it's really beneficial, should I say, if you can be that. So I do like to talk about just being happy, being gainfully employed, or that kind of thing.
Thinkerbell has been highly awarded and is a very exciting agency to watch, and the work that it produces, the culture that you've created. That's now. What would you say to Adam, who was hitting go live or whatever the red button to put it out into the world? What would you say to that, Adam?
I'd say hit the green button, don't hit the red button. Hit the green button because it's good. It will go really well and you'll have a good time. Yeah. When we do try new things, even if they're unsuccessful, I've started a few different businesses that have been shit. and died. But I think that, there's success in that as well. And I think just giving things a go. What's really interesting is when you go on a holiday and you have a really shit experience and it rains the whole time and you hate the holiday and whatever, in the goodness of time, all of that becomes really positive and interesting, and a really fun thing to talk about. So no matter how shitty or how bad it is, or how much of a failure it was, I think it's a success in time. You just give yourself a month, a year, 5 years, that will have been a success. You just need a bit of perspective from it.
Adam, you have given so much of yourself in just sharing your story here with me. You put a lot of great work out in the world. You've got some ripping books that anybody that wants to get into brand work, advertising or otherwise should be reading. That's a lot to put out into the world. You're supporting others. What can the listener and I do to support you on your journey?
I appreciate the question. I think what I would like is to take the idea of people being less hard on themselves, and I like the idea of closing this gap of expectation. So anything people can do to help me articulate that better or be more influential in trying to get that message across, I kind of like the idea of.
Well, that's a wonderful note to leave on. I'm going to also make sure naturally in the show notes that we link to all of your work, and so the listener can go and check out everything, even that board game, which I find fascinating. So we'll make sure to link to that so everyone can play and get to know each other a little bit better, and maybe themselves too. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you today. So thank you so much for your time and all you're doing in the world.
Good on you, mate. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the stories of starting over with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you liked the episode and are keen to hear more, please hit the follow button and leave a review. And let's keep the conversation going on Instagram @unemployedandafraid, where there's more goodies and links to today's show notes. See you there.